A crumpled napkin, a few hastily scribbled words of kindness, passed from a struggling waitress to a lonely old man. It was a gesture that cost nothing, a fleeting moment of human connection in a bustling Chicago diner. But what if that connection was a spark landing on a field of dry tinder? What if the lonely customer wasn't just another forgotten soul, but a man with the power to change the world, searching for one single reason to believe in it again? This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of how a simple act of empathy unraveled a web of family secrets, corporate greed, and revealed that the truest inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in character. The Cornerstone Diner wasn't a place you went to for a culinary experience. It was a place you went to for refuge. Located on a less than fashionable corner in Chicago's Lincoln Park, it smelled perpetually of frying bacon, stale coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of industrial-grade maple syrup. The vinyl on the booth seats was cracked like old leather, and the jukebox in the corner had been stuck on a loop of 1970s soft rock for the better part of a decade. For Abigail Reed, or Abby, as everyone knew her, it was both her stage and her sanctuary. At 24, Abby moved with an efficiency that bordered on art. She could balance 4 plates on one arm, take 3 orders at once, and refill a coffee cup from across the table without spilling a drop, all while mentally rehearsing the Krebs cycle for her upcoming biochemistry exam. Nursing school was a demanding master, and the diner was the unforgiving benefactor that paid for it. Every tip, every extra shift was a step closer to a different life, one where she could provide proper care for her younger brother Noah. For the past 3 months, a new fixture had appeared at the diner. He was an old man who always took the corner booth, the one with the deepest cracks in the red vinyl. He'd arrive like clockwork at 3:00 p.m., just as the lunch rush died and the pre-dinner lull set in. He never ordered more than a black coffee which he'd nurse for hours, his gaze lost somewhere out the window, watching the world hurry by without him. He was neat, but his clothes were worn. A simple tweed jacket that had seen better days, grey trousers with a faint crease, and scuffed but polished leather shoes. He looked like a retired professor or a widower who had lost his anchor. The other waitresses called him Mr. Ghost because he barely spoke, offered only a slight nod for a refill, and left exactly $2 as a tip paid in crisp, clean bills. But Abby saw something more. She saw the profound, almost physical loneliness that clung to him like his worn jacket. It was in the way his shoulders slumped, the way his hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup, the way his eyes, a surprisingly sharp, intelligent blue, held a deep, settled sadness. He reminded her of the patients she saw during her clinical rotations, the ones whose families had stopped visiting. He was a man adrift. Her heart went out to him. She made a point to give him her warmest smile to ensure his coffee was always fresh and hot. She'd say things like, "Hope you're having a peaceful afternoon," or "Stay warm out there, the wind's picking up." He'd respond with that same small, almost imperceptible nod. But she thought, or perhaps hoped, that she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a brief acknowledgement that he was seen. Today the sadness around him felt heavier. A cold, damp rain lashed against the diner's windows, and the grey sky seemed to have seeped inside, muting the already faded colours of the room. The old man just stared into his cup, his face a mask of quiet despair. Abby watched him from behind the counter, her heart aching with a familiar pang of empathy. She knew that feeling. The weight of the world. The sense of being utterly alone, even in a crowded room. She felt it every time she looked at Noah's mounting medical bills, every time an exam felt impossibly hard, An impulse, sharp and insistent, seized her. It was silly. It was unprofessional. Her manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose personality was as greasy as the diner's grill, would have a fit if he saw. But she couldn't shake it. She grabbed a clean napkin from the dispenser. Her pen, borrowed from a stack near the register, hovered over the soft paper. What could she possibly say? She chewed her lip. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She thought about what she would want to hear on her darkest days. Finally, she wrote, "I don't know your story, but I see you. Some days are heavier than others, and I just wanted you to know that someone is hoping your load gets a little lighter soon. You're not invisible." Her hand trembled slightly as she folded the napkin. Her shift was ending. She poured the man one last refill. As she set the hot mug down, her fingers brushed his. They were cold. With her back to the rest of the diner, she discreetly slid the folded napkin next to his saucer. "Have a good evening, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hiss of the rain and the hum of the refrigerator. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers for a fraction of a second longer than usual. He gave his customary nod. Abby turned and walked away, grabbing her coat and backpack. She didn't look back. A part of her was mortified, convinced she had crossed a line and made a lonely man feel pitied. But another stronger part of her felt a quiet sense of rightness. In a world that so often looked away, she had chosen to see. She pushed the diner door open and stepped into the cold, rainy Chicago evening, completely unaware that she had just lit a match in the quiet, carefully constructed world of Arthur Pendleton. Arthur Pendleton stared at the folded napkin. For a long moment, he didn't touch it. He was a man who had built an empire. Pendleton Global, a conglomerate with interests in logistics, technology, and real estate on the principle of detached analysis. Emotions were liabilities. Trust was a commodity, to be earned, not given. And yet this simple, unexpected gesture from the young waitress, with the kind eyes and the perpetually tired smile, had breached defenses he hadn't even realized were still active. His life had become a sterile, gilded cage. His vast mansion in Lake Forest felt more like a museum than a home. His days were managed by a team of assistants, his health by a cohort of private physicians, and his finances by the sharpest minds money could buy. He was surrounded by people, yet utterly, profoundly alone. His 2 children were the source of his deepest disappointment. His son Richard was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who saw the Pendleton name not as a legacy, but as a limitless credit line. His daughter Victoria was a creature of society pages and hollow charity galas, her empathy as manufactured as the pearls she wore. They were waiting for him to die. He knew it. They saw him as a vault, and they were merely biding their time until they could get the combination. That was the reason for his strange pilgrimage to the Cornerstone Diner. Disgusted with his blood heirs, he had conceived of a final, desperate plan. He would find a different kind of heir. Not for his entire fortune, the corporate structure was too complex for that, but for the heart of his legacy. The Pendleton Philanthropic Trust, a multi-billion-dollar foundation he had built to enact real change in the world. He needed someone with integrity, grit, and most importantly, a genuine, unprompted capacity for human kindness. So he had shed his identity. He became Arthur the lonely old man. For 3 months he had sat in this booth observing. He watched the world through the diner's window, a laboratory of human behavior. He saw rudeness, impatience, and indifference. And he saw Abby. He had noticed her from the first day. While others were brusque, she was patient. While others ignored the fussy child or the confused tourist, she offered a crayon or a gentle direction. He had been testing her in his own quiet way. He'd deliberately been a bad customer, staying for hours ordering little tipping modestly. He wanted to see if her kindness had a breaking point. It didn't. Now this note. With a hand that trembled more from emotion than from age, he picked up the napkin and unfolded it. He read the words once, then twice. "You're not invisible." A crack appeared in the glacial wall around his heart. It had been decades since anyone had offered him something with no expectation of return. His children's affection was transactional. His employees' respect was paid for. This was real. His decision solidified. Abigail Reed was the one. But a final test was needed, a test of her resilience. Over the next 2 weeks, Arthur escalated his observation, employing the discreet resources of his most trusted associate, a sharp, impeccably dressed lawyer named Benjamin Sterling. He wanted to know everything about her. Sterling's report was thorough and confirmed Arthur's instincts. Abigail Reed was an orphan, having lost her parents in a car accident when she was 18. She was the sole guardian of her 16-year-old brother Noah, who suffered from a severe form of cystic fibrosis. Her nursing school tuition was paid for, with a patchwork of scholarships, loans, and every single dollar she earned at the diner. She lived in a tiny rented apartment in a walk-up building. Her life was a daily battle against financial and emotional exhaustion. One afternoon, Arthur sat in his usual booth, watching as a scene unfolded. A family with 3 boisterous, messy children had just left. They had been demanding and had left a disaster in their wake: ketchup smeared on the table crayons, ground into the floor, and a paltry tip on a significant bill. Mr. Henderson, the manager, stormed over to the table. "Reed, look at this mess and a $5 tip on a $60 check. Maybe if you smiled more, you'd earn more." He sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Abby's face flushed, but she held her composure. "I'll clean it up right away, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice tight. "You bet you will, and do it fast. We're not paying you to stand around." Arthur watched his hands clenching into fists beneath the table. He saw the flicker of humiliation in her eyes, but he also saw the steel in her spine as she grabbed a rag and began cleaning without a word of complaint. She absorbed the injustice and simply got on with the work. That was resilience. The final piece of the test came a week later. Arthur arranged through a third party for an actor to play the part of a belligerent drunk customer. The man stumbled into the diner, slurring his words, demanding service, and making inappropriate comments to Abby. "Hey, gorgeous, how's about a smile for an old soldier?" The actor slurred, grabbing her wrist as she tried to pour him water. Abby pulled her arm back, firmly but calmly. "Sir, I can get you some coffee, but I need you to please not touch me." "What's the matter?" "Too good for me," he bellowed, rising slightly from his seat. The diner fell silent. Mr. Henderson hid behind the kitchen door. Arthur watched his heart in his throat. This was the moment. Would she crumble? Would she yell? Abby stood her ground. She looked the man directly in the eye, her own gaze unwavering. "No, sir. But everyone here deserves to be treated with respect, including me. If you can't do that, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Her voice didn't shake. It was clear, firm, and full of a quiet authority that cut through the man's drunken facade. The actor, taken aback by her directness, mumbled an apology and shuffled out of the diner. Abby took a deep, shaky breath, her composure cracking only for a second before she straightened her apron and moved to the next table, as if nothing had happened. In the corner booth, Arthur Pendleton felt a warmth spread through his chest. It was the feeling of certainty. He had seen her kindness, her resilience, and now her courage. The test was over. He took one last sip of his cold coffee, left his customary $2 on the table, and walked out of the Cornerstone Diner for the last time as a lonely old ghost. The next time Abigail Reed saw him, it would be as the man who was about to change her life forever. The following Tuesday began like any other for Abby. The morning was a blur of anatomy flashcards and burnt toast, followed by a grueling 8-hour shift at the diner. The old man hadn't been in for a week, and a strange part of her missed his quiet presence. She hoped her note hadn't scared him away. She was wiping down the counter, her body aching with fatigue, when the bell above the door chimed. But it wasn't a regular customer who entered. It was a man who looked so out of place in the Cornerstone Diner that he might as well have beamed down from another planet. He wore a charcoal grey suit that was so perfectly tailored it seemed to have been woven onto his body. His shoes shone with a blinding polish, and he carried a sleek leather briefcase. He had an air of quiet, formidable authority. This was Benjamin Sterling. He swept the room with a brief, dismissive glance before his eyes landed on Abby. He moved towards the counter with the silent, purposeful stride of a predator. Mr. Henderson scurried out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, his face a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Can I, help you, sir?" Henderson stammered. Sterling's gaze remained fixed on Abby. "I'm looking for Ms. Abigail Reed," he said, his voice a low, precise baritone that commanded attention. Abby's stomach plummeted. This was it. She was being served papers. The hospital for Noah's last visit, the student loan company, it had to be one of them. Her mind raced, calculating balances and payment due dates. "I'm Abigail Reed," she said, her voice small. She could feel the eyes of every customer in the diner on her. Sterling gave a curt nod. He placed his briefcase on the counter with a soft click. "My name is Benjamin Sterling. I am legal counsel for a client who wishes to have a private word with you." "A client?" Abby asked, confused. "I don't understand. Am I in some kind of trouble?" "On the contrary," Sterling said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He opened the briefcase and retrieved a thick, cream-colored envelope. The paper felt impossibly expensive. Her name was written on the front in elegant calligraphy. "My employer, Mr. Arthur Pendleton, formally requests your presence tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. He slid the envelope across the counter. Abby just stared at it. Pendleton. The name sounded vaguely familiar, like a building or a brand she couldn't quite place. I have a class tomorrow morning," she said weakly. "I assure you, Ms. Reed, it will be in your best interest to reschedule it." Sterling stated not as a suggestion, but as a fact. He then produced a business card and a second, smaller envelope. "The address is on the invitation. This second envelope contains $500 to compensate you for your lost wages from this shift, which you will be leaving immediately, and for any inconvenience incurred by changing your plans tomorrow." Abby's jaw dropped. $500. That was more than she made in a week. Mr. Henderson's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. But why, Abby managed to ask her mind, reeling. Who is Arthur Pendleton, and what could he possibly want with me? "Mr. Pendleton prefers to explain things himself," Sterling replied smoothly. He gestured to the door. "A car is waiting to take you home." Abby looked around the diner at the familiar cracked vinyl and the sticky syrup dispensers. Then she looked at the impeccably dressed lawyer and the thick envelope. It felt like a dream, a strange, terrifying, and exhilarating one. Her shift wasn't over for another 2 hours, but the thought of getting home early, of having a small cushion of cash that wasn't immediately earmarked for a bill, was intoxicating. With a deep breath, she untied her apron and placed it on the counter. "Okay," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of confidence. "Okay, I'll be there." Mr. Henderson just stared, speechless, as Abby took the envelopes, grabbed her backpack, and followed Benjamin Sterling out of the diner. A sleek black town car was idling at the curb, its engine a low, powerful hum. The driver, in a crisp uniform, held the door open for her. As she slid onto the plush leather seat, so different from the diner's cracked vinyl, she felt a profound sense of dislocation. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the warm, greasy lights of the Cornerstone Diner behind. Abby clutched the invitation in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was heading into the complete unknown, summoned by a mysterious man with an impossibly familiar name. The address on the invitation was for the Pendleton Tower, a gleaming skyscraper of black steel and glass that pierced the Chicago skyline. Abby had passed it 100 times on the bus, never imagining she would one day be walking through its cavernous, marble-floored lobby. Dressed in her one good outfit, a simple black dress and a cardigan, she felt woefully out of place amongst the stream of power-suited executives. She announced herself to the receptionist, who, after a quick, surprised glance at her, spoke softly into a headset. A moment later, Benjamin Sterling appeared. "Ms. Reed." Punctual. "Excellent," he said, his demeanor as crisp and professional as it had been in the diner. "Please follow me." He led her to a private elevator. There were no buttons inside, only a discreet keycard slot into which Sterling inserted a card. The elevator ascended with breathtaking speed and silence. Abby's ears popped as they climbed. The doors opened directly into a sprawling penthouse office that seemed to occupy the entire floor. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, godlike view of the city and Lake Michigan. The furniture was modern and minimalist. The art on the walls was museum quality, and a magnificent mahogany desk stood before the windows, looking out over the world. Standing by the window, his back to her, was a man. He was tall and wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. He turned slowly, and Abby's breath caught in her throat. It was him, the lonely old man from the diner. But he was transformed. The worn tweed jacket was gone, replaced by fine wool. The slump in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a posture of quiet command. The sadness in his eyes was still there, but it was now tempered by a piercing intelligence and a look of profound weariness. He was older, yes, but he was not the frail, ghostly figure from the corner booth. He was powerful. Mr. Pendleton. Abby whispered, her mind struggling to reconcile the two images. "Hello, Abigail," he said, his voice richer and stronger than she had ever heard it. "Please have a seat." "Thank you, Benjamin. You may leave us." Sterling gave a slight bow and exited the elevator doors, closing with a soft hiss, leaving Abby alone with the billionaire. Her legs felt like jelly as she sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Arthur Pendleton walked around the desk, but didn't sit behind it. Instead, he perched on the edge, creating an air of intimacy that was at odds with the grandeur of the room. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small, slightly wrinkled object. A napkin. He carefully unfolded it and placed it on the desk between them. "You're not invisible." Abby stared at her own handwriting. It was you, she stammered. In the diner. All that time. It was, he confirmed, his blue eyes watching her intently. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and for the past 3 months I have been conducting an experiment. A search, if you will. I apologize for the deception, but it was necessary. A search. For what? Abby asked, her confusion warring with a dawning, incredible understanding. Arthur's face clouded over. For a person of character, he said, his voice laced with bitterness. I have built an empire, Ms. Reed. I have amassed a fortune that is by any measure obscene, and I have 2 children who view that fortune as their birthright. They are disappointments. They possess greed, but no grit. Ambition, but no empathy. They are waiting for me to pass so they can carve up my life's work like a turkey on Thanksgiving. He paused, the silence in the room, heavy with the weight of his words. I cannot in good conscience leave my true legacy in their hands. I'm not talking about the corporation that is a machine that will run itself. I am talking about the Pendleton Philanthropic Trust, a foundation with assets of over $5 billion, dedicated to funding medical research education and poverty relief. It requires a leader with a moral compass, not a calculator. He stood up and walked to the window, gazing down at the city below. So I went looking. I disguised myself, sat in that diner, and I watched people. I wanted to find someone who was kind when no one was looking. Someone who was resilient in the face of hardship. Someone who was brave enough to stand up for themselves. I watched you for months, Abigail. I saw you handle difficult customers with grace. I saw your manager berate you, and you took it with quiet dignity. I orchestrated a final test with a belligerent man, and you met him not with anger, but with courage and self-respect. He turned back to face her, his eyes shining with an intensity that startled her. And then you gave me this, he said, gesturing to the napkin. An act of pure, unprompted kindness to a lonely old stranger. You passed a test you didn't even know you were taking. Abby was speechless. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The diner, Noah tuition, the exhaustion, the condescending Mr. Henderson, the kind old man who wasn't a kind old man at all. Arthur returned to the desk. I am not offering you a handout, Abigail. I am offering you a position, a partnership. I want to mentor you. I will pay for your nursing degree and any other education you wish to pursue. I will ensure your brother receives the absolute best medical care money can buy anywhere in the world. And in return, I want you to learn from me. Learn how this world works. Learn how to wield power and influence, not for personal gain, but for the greater good. I want to prepare you to one day take my place at the head of the Pendleton Trust. I am looking for an heir, Abigail. Not of my blood, but of my spirit. And I believe I have found her in you. The scale of it was impossible to grasp. It was too much, too fast. From a world of counting tips and worrying about rent to a world of billions of dollars and philanthropic trusts, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Why me? She finally whispered the question, feeling small and inadequate in the vast office. Arthur Pendleton offered her the first genuine warm smile she had ever seen from him. Because, he said, tapping the crumpled napkin with his finger, in a world full of people who are looking for something to get, you were the one person who was looking for something to give. The news of Arthur Pendleton's chosen heir did not remain a secret for long. Within the cold, calculating world of the Pendleton family, it landed like a declaration of war. Richard and Victoria Pendleton, summoned to their father's office a day after his meeting with Abby, were incandescent with rage. Richard, a man whose ambition had long ago curdled into pure avarice, slammed his hand on the mahogany desk. A waitress. A charity case from some greasy spoon. Have you lost your mind? Father, this is our birthright. Victoria, ever the more cunning of the two, adopted a tone of wounded concern. Daddy darling, we're worried about you. This is clearly the action of a man who isn't thinking clearly. This girl, this nobody. She's obviously a grifter, a parasite who saw an opportunity and latched on. Arthur listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. When they had finished their tirade, he spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. Your birthright, as you call it, was never a guarantee. It was a privilege you have both proven time and again you are unworthy of. The trust requires a heart, something neither of you have ever displayed. My decision is final. You will not touch the foundation. He informed them that their already lavish trust funds would be capped and their access to the corporate accounts severely restricted. He was cutting the cord. Their fury, finding no purchase against their father's iron will, quickly redirected itself toward the perceived source of their misfortune, Abigail Reed. They were not foolish enough to make a public scene. Instead, they chose their battlefield carefully. A few days later, as Abby was leaving her small apartment building for a meeting with Arthur, she found them waiting for her on the sidewalk. Richard stood blocking her path, his expensive suit looking absurd against the backdrop of the crumbling brick facade. Victoria leaned against a black Mercedes, her arms crossed, a venomous smirk on her face. Abigail Reed. Richard began, his voice oozing a predatory charm. My father's little project. We need to have a talk. Abby's heart began to pound, but she thought of the courage she'd shown to the actor in the diner. She straightened her back. I don't think we have anything to talk about, Mr. Pendleton. Oh, I think we do, Richard said, taking a step closer. His charm evaporated, replaced by raw menace. Let me be clear. You are a temporary amusement, a whim. You are out of your depth and you are going to be crushed. Walk away from this fantasy. I am prepared to offer you a one-time payment of $1 million to disappear from our father's life. Sign a non-disclosure agreement and go back to wherever it is you came from. $1 million. A year ago, that sum would have solved every problem she had ever had. Now it felt like an insult. My answer is no. Richard's face darkened. Wrong answer. You have a little brother, don't you, Noah? Suffers from cystic fibrosis. It would be a terrible, terrible shame if the funding for his new experimental treatment were to suddenly encounter administrative difficulties. A cold dread washed over Abby. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a threat against her family. Before she could respond, Victoria pushed herself off the car and glided forward. She circled Abby like a shark, her eyes filled with contemptuous pity. Richard, you're being so crude, she purred. Can't you see she's just a frightened little girl playing dress-up? Listen to me, dear, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You don't belong in our world. It will eat you alive. The board members, the lawyers, the media, they will tear you to shreds. You think my father can protect you? He's an old man who has chosen you as his final pathetic act of rebellion against us. When he's gone, you'll be all alone. Take the money. It's more than you could ever dream of earning. Save yourself the humiliation. It was a two-pronged attack, Richard's brute force and Victoria's psychological warfare. For a moment, Abby faltered. The fear was real. The world they described was terrifying, a place of shadows and knives she couldn't comprehend. The thought of Noah being used as a pawn was sickening. She looked from Richard's cruel face to Victoria's condescending sneer. And in that moment, she saw them for what they were: hollow. They were the ghosts. They were the ones who were truly invisible, defined only by the money they thought they were owed. Her resolve hardened into something unbreakable. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady. She looked Richard square in the eye. "If you threaten my brother again, you'll discover that I am not the person you think I am." Then she turned to Victoria. "And you're wrong. I'm not playing dress-up. Your father didn't choose me as an act of rebellion against you. He chose me because he was looking for everything you're not." Without another word, she pushed past Richard and walked down the street toward the car Arthur had sent for her, not allowing herself to look back. Her hands were shaking, and her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. But she had not broken. When she told Arthur what had happened, his face became a thundercloud. The meeting was cancelled. He made a single phone call to Benjamin Sterling. The next day, Richard and Victoria found their corporate credit cards declined and their access to all Pendleton properties revoked. They had made a critical error. They had mistaken Abby's kindness for weakness. In doing so, they had not only sealed their own fate, but had shown Arthur beyond any doubt that his choice had been the right one. They had also shown Abby a crucial lesson about the world she was entering. The true strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the courage to act in spite of it. The aftermath of the confrontation was a crucible. Arthur, galvanized by his children's venomous attack, didn't just mentor Abby. He immersed her. Her life became a study in contrasts, a dizzying oscillation between two worlds. One morning, she would be in scrubs at Chicago Mercy, practicing IV insertions on a rubber mannequin and memorizing drug interactions. That same afternoon, she would be sitting across from Arthur and Benjamin Sterling in the penthouse office, the scent of antiseptic still clinging to her clothes as she learned the intricate language of endowments, trusts, and capital allocation. "The Henderson proposal is sound," Sterling said during one such meeting, pushing a thick binder across the mahogany desk. "They're requesting $12 million for a new oncology research wing. The projected ROI in terms of potential patents is substantial." Abby scanned the executive summary. Her brow furrowed. The numbers were impressive, the science cutting edge. But her mind kept snagging on a detail from her clinical rotation the day before a conversation with the wife of a cancer patient. "It's missing something," Abby said quietly. The two men looked at her. "The proposal allocates less than 1% of the budget to patient and family support services. Where is the funding for temporary housing for families who have to travel for treatment? Where is the budget for grief counseling, for child care, during appointments for translators?" She looked up, her gaze direct. "A new wing full of advanced equipment is wonderful, but it's useless if the patient's family is sleeping in their car in the parking garage because they can't afford a hotel. The human element isn't an accessory, Mr. Sterling. It's the entire point." Sterling looked taken aback, but Arthur leaned forward, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across his face. "That," he said, tapping the binder, "is why you are here, Abigail. You see the person, not just the patent." That evening, back in her small apartment, Abby saw the true face of her new reality. On her laptop screen, Noah's face was bright and full of life, framed by the majestic backdrop of the Swiss Alps. He was no longer pale and gaunt. He had gained weight, his cheeks were rosy, and he spoke in long, excited sentences without pausing for a painful, racking cough. "You won't believe it, Abs," he said, his voice buzzing with the energy of a typical 16-year-old. "We went on a hike today. A real one. Uphill. And I wasn't even the last one to the top." Tears welled in Abby's eyes. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy. For years, her life had been a frantic race to keep Noah's head above water. Now, because of the man she once thought was a lonely ghost, her brother was climbing mountains. This was the reality of the numbers in the binders. This was the human element. "I believe it, Noah," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you could." This newfound purpose culminated 3 months later. Abby stood backstage in the main auditorium of Chicago Mercy Hospital, her hands trembling as she smoothed down her simple navy dress. On the other side of the curtain, a crowd of doctors, administrators, journalists, and city officials had gathered. In the front row, Arthur sat not as a formidable tycoon, but as her anchor, giving her a small, encouraging nod. She was introduced and walked to the podium, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice gaining strength with every word. "Many of you in this room knew me not long ago as a student in your clinical program. Some of you might have even seen me working a second job over at the Cornerstone Diner." She began, a murmur rippling through the crowd. "I spent my days learning from you, and my nights pouring coffee, all with one goal, to one day be able to provide the best possible care for people like my brother Noah." She spoke not from a script, but from the heart. She told them about the helplessness of watching a loved one struggle to breathe, about the fear that came with every hospital bill. Then her tone shifted. "Today, thanks to the vision and profound generosity of my mentor, Mr. Arthur Pendleton, I have the extraordinary privilege of standing on the other side of that equation, not just hoping for better care, but helping to build it." She gestured to the architectural rendering on the screen behind her. The new Pendleton Trust funded Abigail and Noah Reed. Center for Pediatric Respiratory Health will be more than a building. It will be a sanctuary, a place where cutting-edge research meets compassionate, holistic care, a place where no family will ever have to choose between their child's health and a roof over their head. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a thunderous standing ovation. But Abby's eyes were locked on Arthur. The old billionaire's face was a study in emotion, his usual stoicism washed away by a look of immense pride. He was seeing his true legacy not in stone or steel, but in the spirit of the young woman he had chosen. Later that week, Abby drove Arthur back to a familiar place. The Cornerstone Diner was exactly as they'd left it, perpetually bathed in the warm glow of fluorescent lights. Mr. Henderson, seeing them enter, stopped mid-stride, his mouth agape as he recognized the city's most reclusive billionaire and the waitress whose face was now in the papers. Abby offered him a warm, genuine smile that held no trace of triumph. They slid into the corner booth, the vinyl just as cracked as she remembered. A new, tired-looking waitress came to their table. "Just coffee for me." "Black," Arthur said, his eyes twinkling. "Make it 2. Abby smiled. As the waitress left, Arthur looked around the humble diner, then back at Abby. "This is where it began," he said, his voice soft. "I came here looking for one honest thing in a world I no longer trusted." Abby wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic mug, the gesture as familiar as breathing. "And I was just hoping the lonely man in the corner wasn't quite so alone." They sat in a comfortable silence, the the clatter of plates and the low hum of the jukebox a familiar soundtrack. He was no longer a ghost, and she was no longer just a waitress. They were partners, a quiet testament to a different kind of wealth. The true inheritance wasn't the $5 billion trust. It was the crumpled napkin that sat on Arthur's desk, a simple, profound reminder that the most valuable thing one person can give another is the feeling of being seen. The Swiss mountain air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the humid, exhaust-filled streets of a Chicago summer. Abby watched from the balcony of the small private clinic as her brother Noah kicked a soccer ball with a physical therapist in the manicured garden below. He was laughing a full, deep laugh that wasn't cut short by a racking cough. The experimental gene therapy was working miracles. His lung capacity had improved by 30%, and the perpetual shadow of fatigue that had haunted his young face was finally beginning to recede. For the first time, Abby felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost unnerving. In the 6 months since she had accepted Arthur's proposition, her life had settled into a demanding but rewarding rhythm. Her nursing studies provided a grounding in the human reality she never wanted to lose, while her evenings with Arthur and Benjamin Sterling were a masterclass in power finance and responsibility. She was learning that managing a multi-billion-dollar trust wasn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about directing a powerful river of resources toward the people who needed it most. She had found her footing, her confidence growing with each proposal she analyzed and each project she championed. The specter of Richard and Victoria had faded their threats, seeming like the impotent rage of spoiled children who had been sent to their rooms. It was in this peaceful state, watching her brother chase a ball under the shadow of the Alps, that her phone buzzed with an encrypted call from Benjamin Sterling. Abby Sterling's voice was grim, stripped of its usual professional placidity. "We have a problem, a significant one." The peace shattered instantly. "What is it?" "Is it Arthur?" "He's fine. It's Richard and Victoria. They've made their move. They filed a petition in Cook County Court this morning. They are seeking to have your appointment to the Trust's board nullified, and more than that, they are formally contesting Arthur's mental competency." Abby sank into a chair on the balcony, the cold metal a shock to her system. "On what grounds? Undue influence," Sterling said the legal term dripping with disdain. "They're painting a picture of a senile, lonely old man being manipulated by a cunning, opportunistic young woman. They're claiming you preyed on his vulnerability for financial gain. It's a classic ugly legal maneuver. But it's a lie. Arthur is sharper than anyone I've ever met." "They won't get anywhere with that," Abby said, a defensive anger rising in her. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. "It's not the court I'm worried about in the short term, Abby. It's the other one. The court of public opinion. They've retained the services of a PR firm known for its scorched earth tactics, and they've given an exclusive interview to the National Inquisitor." Abby's blood ran cold. The National Inquisitor was a bottom-feeding tabloid known for its salacious headlines and reputation-destroying exposes. "What did they say?" she whispered. The headline reads, "Billionaire's Waitress Heiress, a secret past of debt, deceit, and desperation. They've twisted your entire life story into something unrecognizable. They've framed you as a grifter with a long history of financial instability." Sterling continued, his voice flat as he relayed the sickening details. They had dug up every skeleton, no matter how small. They found the record of the eviction notice she received when she was 19, struggling to pay rent after her parents' death. They found the small claims court filing from a utility company for an unpaid bill she had contested. They even found a record of Noah being suspended from school for a day 2 years ago for a minor prank. They wove these disparate, painful threads into a narrative of a transient, unreliable family, portraying her as a predator who had honed her skills on landlords and creditors before landing the biggest whale of all, a lonely billionaire. They had taken the very struggles that had forged her character and weaponized them as proof of her corruption. When the call ended, Abby remained on the balcony, trembling. The beautiful mountain view seemed to mock her. The shame was a physical blow winding her. It was one thing to be threatened in person by Richard and Victoria. It was another to have her most vulnerable moments laid bare and twisted for public consumption. She thought of her classmates, her professors, the nurses at the hospital. What would they think when they saw this? Victoria's voice echoed in her mind. "You don't belong in our world. It will eat you alive." In that moment, she believed it. She flew back to Chicago the next day. Arthur met her at his office, his face a mask of cold fury. A copy of the tabloid lay on his desk like a dead thing. "This is filth," he snarled, sweeping it into a wastebasket. "This is how they fight, Abby. In the gutter. But we will fight back harder. Benjamin has already compiled a dossier on every disreputable thing Richard and Victoria have ever done. And believe me, it is a very thick file. We will leak it to a more reputable but equally damaging news source. We will hire private investigators to dig deeper. We will counter their legal petition with a suit for defamation that will financially cripple them. We will bury them." He was in full warrior mode, the ruthless titan of industry who had built an empire by crushing his opposition. He was doing it to protect her. She knew that. But listening to him outline the strategy of mutual destruction, Abby felt a wave of nausea. This was their game. A game of mudslinging, of secrets and lies, of finding the weak point in your enemy and pressing down until they broke. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Arthur stopped looking at her in surprise. "No, Abigail, this is not the time for timidity. They have attacked your character. We must respond in kind with overwhelming force and become just like them," she asked, her voice rising with passion. "Is that the first lesson of my new role, that to protect our integrity, we have to abandon it? You chose me because of who I am. Arthur, because I was a waitress who showed kindness, a sister who fought for her brother, a student who worked herself to the bone. All those things they're twisting in that disgusting paper. That was my life. It was hard, and it was sometimes messy, and I made mistakes. But I am not ashamed of it. I am not ashamed of fighting to survive." She walked to the window, looking down at the city that had been her home, her struggle, and now her battleground. "If I agree to fight them in the gutter, I've already lost. If we leak files and hire spies and engage in the same character assassination they have, we validate their entire worldview. We admit that this is how power works. You didn't choose me to be another shark, Arthur. You chose me. I hope to be something different." A long silence filled the room. Arthur stared at her, his initial fury slowly giving way to a look of profound contemplation. He was seeing not just the protégé he had chosen, but the leader she was becoming. She wasn't just following his instructions, she was challenging him, forcing him to reconcile the ruthless tactics that had built his empire with the higher moral purpose he sought for his legacy. Finally, He nodded slowly. What do you propose we do? Abby took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. We don't fight them in the press, and we don't stoop to their level. We fight them in the courtroom with the truth, the full, unvarnished truth. I will give a deposition. I will answer every single one of their allegations, not with excuses, but with context. I will tell them what it's like to be 18 years old and suddenly responsible for a sick child and a mountain of debt. I will own my past, all of it. I will not let them define my story for me. It was a terrifying proposition to voluntarily place herself under the harsh lights of a legal deposition and expose her life's most difficult moments to a team of lawyers paid to destroy her. But it was the only way. It was the Abigail Reed way. She would not hide. She would not allow shame to be her cage. She had faced down belligerent customers, condescending managers, and direct threats. She would face this too, not with a billionaire's power, but with a waitress's resilience. She would show them that the very things they saw as her greatest weaknesses were in fact the source of her greatest strength. In the end, this wasn't a story about a waitress who got lucky. It was the story of a man who was saved and a woman who found her true calling. It proves that character is the one currency that can't be bought or faked. Abigail Reed's simple act of kindness wasn't a lottery ticket. It was a reflection of who she was, a quality Arthur Pendleton was wise enough to recognize as priceless. Their story is a powerful reminder that we never truly know the impact of our actions or the silent battles others are fighting. The world is full of lonely people in corner booths waiting for someone to see them. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of empathy. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell for more real-life stories that inspire and prove that the best parts of humanity are often found in the most unexpected places.